Have you ever wondered if humanity's greatest triumph was also its most catastrophic mistake? If the very warriors forged to protect mankind were destined, from the first spark of their creation, to become the reason for its eternal suffering? There was a time, long before the galaxy drowned in war, when the dream of unity burned like a newborn star. The Emperor of mankind, a being beyond comprehension, cloaked in golden light and ancient wisdom, sought to bring peace to a scattered, broken species. In his vision, there would be no gods, no monsters, no chains. Only mankind, ascendant and pure. But even gods can fall to hubris, and it was hubris that led to the birth of the Space Marines, the angels of death who would one day become the ghosts of his failure. They were not merely soldiers. They were engineered miracles humanity perfected, flesh sculpted by science older than the stars, gene-coded with divine fury and iron faith. To many, they were saviors. To the Emperor, they were tools. And like all tools of war, they carried the seeds of ruin within their design. From the first moment their blood was spilled in his name, something dark began to stir in the shadow of their glory. The galaxy trembled under their footsteps, and worlds fell in reverence or in ruin. Empires bowed, and heretics burned. But victory has a price, and for the Space Marines, that price was their humanity. They were created to be incorruptible, but nothing in the universe is beyond corruption. Behind their sacred armor, beneath their vows of loyalty, there was something missing, something deliberately taken from them. Compassion. Doubt. The very weakness that makes mortals human. They were perfect because they were empty. And in that emptiness, the warp found its home. No one saw it then, not even the Emperor himself. He believed perfection could exist without consequence. He believed obedience could survive without soul. But perfection is a lie, and obedience is the cruelest illusion of all. The galaxy's greatest weapon was born not out of wisdom, but out of fear, and fear, in the end, always consumes its maker. The birth of the Space Marines was not the dawn of humanity's salvation. It was the quiet beginning of its damnation. And the truth is far darker than anyone dares to admit. Because the Emperor did not create the Space Marines to save humanity. He created them to replace it. Have you ever wondered why a god would need an army? If you were truly all-powerful, why forge weapons of war instead of instruments of peace? Why create killers instead of thinkers, conquerors instead of dreamers? That question lies at the heart of humanity's darkest creation, the Space Marines. And if you stay with me until the very end, you'll uncover the terrifying truth of why they should have never been made. The Emperor's dream was magnificent and doomed. He looked upon a fractured galaxy, scattered with human colonies long lost to time, each worshipping false gods, each drowning in the chaos of its own isolation. He saw a future where only one will would rule all mankind, his own. To bring about that unity, he needed weapons of divine precision, not men of reason, but instruments of obedience. And so, in the vaults of Terra, beneath cathedrals of steel and secrecy, he began his most dangerous experiment. The Legions Astartes, that was their name. Born from gene seed, from the Emperor's own genetic perfection. They were not born, they were crafted. Their hearts beat faster, their blood burned hotter, their minds wired for loyalty that could not falter. They were human only in shape, divine only in their purpose. But here lies the paradox that would one day tear the galaxy apart. In trying to make them perfect, he stripped them of the very imperfection that defines mankind. Each gene seed was a promise and a curse. It carried the strength of gods, but also the arrogance of them. The Emperor believed he could mold loyalty itself, that he could craft beings incapable of betrayal. But loyalty born of engineering, not choice, is fragile. It is not faith, it is programming. And all programming can break. When the first Space Marines took their oaths, they did so with fire in their eyes and silence in their souls. They worshipped not gods, but the idea of perfection. And in that worship, they lost something sacred. The emperor's sons would fight, kill, and die without hesitation, but not one of them would feel. Not truly. And yet, hidden beneath their armor, beneath the steel and discipline, something began to stir, a question unspoken, a whisper of rebellion not born from hatred, but from the faint, dying ember of humanity still buried deep within. That whisper would one day roar across the galaxy as betrayal. And that is where the Emperor's great gamble would begin to collapse. Have you ever asked yourself what it means to be a son of a god? To carry not only his power but his expectations, to live not as yourself, but as a reflection of his will? That question haunted the 20 demigods known as the Primarchs, beings who would shape the destiny of the Imperium, and doom it in equal measure. When the Emperor created the Space Marines, he knew they needed more than leadership, they needed symbols. So, from his own genetic essence, he forged the Primarchs, 20 sons, each an echo of his perfection, each designed to lead one of the 20 legions. But fate, or perhaps something darker, had other plans. The ruinous powers of the warp, those ancient entities that feed on mortal emotion, saw the Emperor's arrogance and smiled. They stole the Primarchs away before the project could be completed, scattering them across the stars like seeds of corruption. Each Primarch grew upon a different world, molded by strange and brutal environments, raised by mortals, beasts, or warlords. They became kings, conquerors, and saviors, each shaped by their surroundings, not their creator. And when the Emperor finally found them, reuniting his lost sons during the Great Crusade, he believed it was destiny fulfilled. But destiny is never so kind. For every Primarch who embraced his father's light like Robert Guilliman or Rogel Dorn, another turned away, carrying bitterness and pride in his heart. Angren, broken by the cruelty of slavery. Mort Arian, scarred by the poison winds of his home world. Magnus, cursed by forbidden knowledge. The seeds of betrayal were already sown, even before the first war was won. The Emperor, blinded by ambition, saw in them the tools of his grand design. He did not see their pain, their jealousy, their individuality. To him, they were chess pieces, each meant to conquer, not to question. But the galaxy is vast, and even gods cannot control every storm. As the Great Crusade burned across the stars, the Primarchs began to see what their father refused to admit, that they were not builders of peace. They were destroyers wearing the mask of salvation. And when sons begin to see the flaws in their father, the question is no longer if they will rebel, but when. The first cracks in the dream appeared quietly. Whispers among the legions. Pride swelling into resentment. Some began to wonder, was the Emperor truly divine, or merely another tyrant draped in gold? The Great Crusade, meant to unite mankind, had instead created the perfect conditions for its own undoing. For the Space Marines were loyal to their Primarchs before they were loyal to the Emperor. And when the Primarchs turned against him, they would bring half of humanity's armies with them. And that, my friend, is how the seeds of the greatest betrayal in history began to grow, a betrayal that would tear the galaxy in two. Have you ever felt the moment a dream begins to die, when something once pure starts to rot from within, and you realize the end was always written into its creation? That was the moment the galaxy changed forever. It began not with thunder, but with a whisper, a single act of doubt that ignited the greatest betrayal in human history, the Horus Heresy. Horus Lupercal. The War Master. The Emperor's favored son. The brightest star in the firmament of mankind's destiny. He was everything the Emperor desired: noble, charismatic, beloved by all the legions. When the Emperor returned to Terra to build the Imperium's foundations, he left Horus in command of the Great Crusade. It was a gesture of absolute trust, and the moment the corruption truly began. In the shadows of the warp, the Chaos Gods watched. They had failed to destroy the Emperor through strength, but they could destroy him through his own creation. They reached into Horus's soul, whispering truths wrapped in lies, love twisted into hatred. They showed him visions: the Emperor crowned as a god, worshipped by mortals, abandoning his sons. And in Horus's pride, those lies became his faith. When Horus fell, half the legions followed him. Brother turned against brother. Sons against their father. Entire worlds burned in a storm of betrayal so vast that even the stars seemed to dim. The Horus heresy was not just a war, it was the shattering of the emperor's illusion. The perfect warriors, the flawless sons, the instruments of order all revealed as fragile, flawed, and easily corrupted. The Space Marines, those angels of death, tore each other apart in his name. The same gene seed that had made them gods now made their fall apocalyptic. And as they slaughtered their brothers, they began to understand what none dared speak, that they were never free. They were creations, not men. Property, not people. And in that realization, something inside them broke beyond repair. The Emperor's greatest triumph became his greatest failure. His dream of unity had birthed only war without end. The galaxy was left scarred, burning, and broken, and the Emperor himself was entombed upon the golden throne, a living corpse sustaining a dying empire. The heresy ended, but its poison never faded. Every chapter, every successor, every marine that would follow carried that same flaw within their veins, the echo of a mistake that could never be undone. And though they would fight for millennia to come, the truth would always remain the same. The Space Marines were not created to save humanity. They were created to destroy its enemies, and in the end, humanity became one of them. Have you ever considered what it means to live forever, to outlast every friend, every world, every purpose you were ever given? To be trapped in a body that cannot die, fighting a war that can never be won? That is the curse of the Space Marines. Immortality was their gift, and their punishment. After the fires of the Horus heresy faded, the Imperium staggered into an age of silence and fear. The Emperor, broken and dying, was sealed within the golden throne, a machine of impossible power, sustaining his withered form for 10,000 years. He became a god in truth, not by his will but by necessity. Humanity could no longer hear his voice, only feel his absence. And in that silence, the Space Marines endured. They fought on, century after century, carrying his name like a sacred wound. But every battle they won carved another piece of their soul away. They became relics of a dead age, warriors without rest, fighting for an emperor who could no longer lead them. Their victories meant nothing. Their brothers died and were replaced by new ones who would share the same hollow fate. They became myths that refused to die, ghosts bound in armor, worshipped as gods yet shackled like slaves. For most men, death is an end. For the Astartes, it is a privilege they are denied. Their bodies heal. Their wounds close. But their minds rot under the weight of endless war. They forget what it means to be human, to dream, to hope. They are eternal soldiers in a universe that has forgotten peace. Their immortality is not life, it is decay stretched thin over millennia. And as time ground on, something terrible began to happen. Their numbers dwindled. Their gene seed, once pure, began to falter. Mutation, madness, spiritual rot, each generation weaker, more unstable than the last. The Emperor's perfect design was breaking down, piece by piece. The sons of gods were becoming less than men. Yet still, they fight. Because that is all they know. They are loyalty given flesh, sacrifice without end. And perhaps, in the deepest chambers of the imperial palace, the Emperor watches not with pride, but with regret. For he must see what his creation has become, the endless machinery of war that sustains an empire built on death. The Space Marines were supposed to be saviors. Instead, they became monuments to the futility of perfection. They are the proof that to strip humanity of its weakness is to strip it of its soul. And so they march, eternally, beneath banners of glory that mean nothing, crusading not for victory, but because they cannot stop. Have you ever wondered what happens when faith outlives its purpose? When belief becomes ritual, and devotion becomes slavery. That is the tragedy of the Imperium of man and the final curse of the Space Marines. 10,000 years have passed since the Emperor was sealed upon the golden throne. 10,000 years of unending war, stagnation, and worship built upon the corpse of a dream. The Imperium calls itself holy now, its people kneeling to a god the Emperor never wished to be. The man who once sought to free humanity from superstition has become the greatest object of worship in the galaxy. The irony is as cruel as it is perfect. And the Space Marines, his once loyal angels, have become the high priests of that false religion. They chant prayers before battle, bless their bolters with sacred oils, and invoke his name with trembling reverence. But deep inside their gene-forged hearts, a silent truth gnaws at them: they no longer know what they fight for. The Emperor never asked for gods. He wanted men. He wanted reason, not worship. But the Space Marines, stripped of doubt and designed to obey, filled the silence of his absence with faith, a hollow faith that binds them tighter than chains ever could. Each chapter now fights its own wars, worships in its own way, convinced that it alone carries the true purpose of their Father. The Ultramarines cling to discipline, the Blood Angels to sorrow, the Dark Angels to secrets. Each legion has become a mirror reflecting the fragment of the Emperor they wish to believe in, and none of them see the truth. They are not his saviors. They are his echo. His curse made eternal. And what of the Imperium they protect? It is no utopia. It is a decaying empire, where entire worlds are sacrificed just to keep the lights on, where humanity is crushed beneath bureaucracy and dogma. The Space Marines fight to preserve a corpse, mistaking its twitching for life. They slay heretics and Xenos without question, never realizing that the true enemy may have always been within, the blind faith that sustains a dying god. And yet, perhaps somewhere deep in their hollow souls, a fragment of humanity still stirs. A single spark of the men they once were, not warriors, not demigods, but humans longing for meaning in an endless war. Perhaps that is the Emperor's final lesson, that perfection without purpose is damnation. The Space Marines were meant to be humanity's shield. But they have become its prison bars, eternal, unbreakable, and blind to the irony of their existence. They were made to protect mankind. Instead, they became the proof that mankind should never have played God. Have you ever stopped to imagine what it feels like to fight a war that never ends? To know that every victory you win will be swallowed by a new enemy, a new heresy, a new horror rising from the dark? That is the existence of the Space Marines, an endless cycle of duty, violence, and silence. And in that eternity, their purpose has long since been lost. The galaxy of the 41st millennium is not alive, it is dying slowly, suffocating under the weight of its own history. Planets are ground to ash in wars no one remembers. Entire star systems vanish beneath the tides of chaos, orcs, and worse. And through it all, the Space Marines march forward, tireless, unyielding, unchanged. Each one a relic of a time when humanity still dared to dream. Now, they are the last dream left standing, and even that is fading. They fight for the Emperor, but the Emperor is gone. They protect humanity, but humanity fears them. They claim to bring order, but every act of conquest only feeds the cycle of destruction. They cannot stop, for stopping would mean facing the truth, that their war is no longer righteous, and that their cause has been lost to time. In their hearts, if hearts they still have, some may sense it. The hollow echo of a question buried deep within the layers of gene code and conditioning: why do we still fight? But the answer never comes. The chaplains tell them faith is the reason. The Codex tells them duty. The Imperium tells them necessity. Yet beneath it all, the real answer is far darker: they fight because they were made to. They are machines of flesh and will, programmed for battle, incapable of peace. If the war were ever to end, they would cease to have meaning. And perhaps that is why the galaxy never truly changes, because the Space Marines, the ultimate soldiers, keep the wheel turning with every bold shell and every blade drawn in the Emperor's name. Across the stars, there are whispers. That somewhere, deep within the warp, even the gods weep for what they've made of humanity. That perhaps the Emperor himself, entombed in silence and agony, regrets not the heresy, not the betrayal, but the moment he chose to create the Astartes. Because that moment sealed the fate of mankind forever. The truth is simple, and terrifying: the Space Marines were humanity's greatest weapon and its final curse. They were created to unite the galaxy, but instead, they ensured it would never know peace again. They are eternal. They are unstoppable. And because of that, the war will never end. So the next time you see the sigil of the Imperium, the skull crowned by wings, remember what it truly stands for: not hope, not unity, but the endless toll of a mistake made 10,000 years ago. The Space Marines should have never been made. And because they were, humanity will never be free. Have you ever wondered what a god thinks as his world burns around him? Does he feel pride for what he's built or regret for what it has become? Does he hear the cries of those who kill and die in his name? For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat upon the golden throne, neither alive nor dead, a corpse sustained by faith and fear. And in that endless silence, lies the answer to why the Space Marines should have never been made. Within the hidden chambers of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor's body remains bound to ancient machinery, a billion souls sacrificed daily to keep his dying light burning. His will is gone, his voice muted. Yet, through the warp, fragments of thought still flicker like dying embers. Regret. Anger. Sorrow. The Emperor does not rule, he endures. And as he endures, he must watch the empire he built twist into something monstrous, a theocracy born of ignorance, worshipping the very idea he despised. The Space Marines were his tools, his children, his perfect soldiers, and now they are the architects of a religion he never wanted. Their every battle cry is a reminder of his failure. Their endless crusades are proof that his dream of unity has become an empire of suffering. And though he cannot speak, one might imagine his thoughts not as divine prophecy, but as the quiet horror of a creator realizing his creation has devoured the world. The Imperium believes the Emperor guides them still. But what if his silence is not divine patience? What if it is despair? What if every prayer, every offering, every war waged in his name deepens his torment, reminding him that he unleashed forces that should have never existed? The truth is unbearable: the Emperor's greatest sin was not ambition, it was belief. He believed humanity could be perfected. He believed order could be forged through force. And in that belief, he doomed everything he loved. Now, the Space Marines fight on as the eternal servants of his silence. They will never know peace, never know purpose beyond war. They are the Emperor's voice, no longer only his echo, hollow and endless. And maybe, somewhere beyond the veil of the warp, he still watches them march into battle, whispering words they will never hear. I made you to save mankind, and in doing so, I destroyed it. The throne hums. The galaxy burns. And the silence continues. Have you ever thought about what it means to leave behind a legacy? Not the kind written in songs or carved into monuments, but the kind that festers in the shadows, growing heavier with every passing age. The Emperor's legacy is not the golden light of salvation. It is the unending war, the fear, the silence, and at the center of it all stand the Space Marines, the immortal reminder of his greatest mistake. 10,000 years after their creation, their legend still terrifies and inspires in equal measure. To the citizens of the Imperium, they are God's living myths who descend from the heavens to deliver justice. But for those who truly understand what they are, the sight of a Space Marine is not hope. It is a warning. Because when they arrive, it means one thing: something must die for mankind to live another day. Each chapter now fights in isolation, clinging to fragments of ancient honor codes, guided by rituals older than memory. The Blood Angels drown in sorrow, haunted by the curse in their veins. The Space Wolves battle their own animal rage, teetering on the edge of mutation. The Dark Angels hide their shame in secret wars that will never end. Each legion carries the burden of imperfection that the Emperor thought he had erased. His perfect sons became broken reflections of his own divided soul. And yet in their brokenness, they endure. For all their flaws, they are still humanity's last wall against the abyss. Every fallen world they reclaim, every daemon they slay, every inch of darkness they push back is done by hands that were never meant to exist. The irony is cruel and absolute. The Emperor's curse has become humanity's only hope. There are whispers among the scholars of the Inquisition, forbidden words spoken in vaults of silence. They say the Emperor knew what would happen. That he foresaw the fall, the heresy, the decay. That he created the Space Marines not to save mankind, but to preserve a fragment of it through the ages, no matter the cost. If that is true, then every war, every death, every sacrifice has been nothing more than part of a design far greater and far darker than anyone could comprehend. But if it's false, then the truth is even more tragic. The galaxy has been bleeding for 10,000 years for nothing. All of this suffering, all of this endless war born from one man's refusal to accept that humanity does not need gods. And that is the shadow of the Emperor's legacy. The Space Marines are not saviors. They are the embodiment of a wound that will never heal, the echo of a dream that should have never been dreamt. They are proof that even gods can make mistakes. And when gods err, entire galaxies burn. Have you ever wondered how the universe ends? Not in fire, not in glory, but in exhaustion. In the slow decay of stars, the silence of forgotten worlds, and the fading echo of war cries that once shook the heavens. That is how the story of the Space Marines will end, not with triumph, but with a whisper. For all their power, for all their perfection, even the Astartes cannot defy eternity. The galaxy is rotting, piece by piece. The Imperium survives not because of hope, but because it cannot die fast enough. Every victory is hollow, every crusade a repetition of the last. The same enemies rise, fall, and rise again. The same prayers are whispered to a God who never answers. The same soldiers fight, bleed, and die while the same mistake continues, uncorrected, unending. The gene seed that once made them immortal now mutates beyond control. Each generation of Space Marines becomes a little more unstable, a little more twisted. The chapters that remain pure are relics, their numbers thinning, their faith ossifying into dogma. The Imperium calls this endurance. In truth, it is rot disguised as resilience. The Astartes cannot evolve. They were made perfect, and perfection cannot adapt. That is their doom. One day, the last chapter will stand upon the ruins of a dying galaxy. Their armor cracked, their oaths long forgotten, their emperor silent as ever. They will look into the void and find nothing looking back. No enemies left to kill. No empire left to serve. Only the unbearable weight of their own existence. And perhaps, for the first time, they will understand what it means to be human, not immortal, not perfect, but finite. Maybe one of them will look toward Terra, toward the dead star that once was home, and whisper a truth that has waited 10,000 years to be spoken. We should have never been. And with that final breath, the galaxy will fall silent. No gods. No heroes. No suns. Only the ghosts of perfection, echoing through the void. The Emperor's greatest creation will have completed its purpose not by saving humanity, but by proving that it was never meant to be saved. The cycle will close, as it always was destined to. Because from the moment the first Space Marine drew breath, the end was already written. They were born to conquer. They lived to destroy. And they will die never knowing why. The greatest warriors in history, born from genius, destroyed by pride, and remembered as the reason the stars themselves went dark. And that is why the Space Marines should have never been made. Have you ever felt the silence after a storm, that eerie calm when all the noise fades, and you're left with nothing but the weight of what was lost? That is how it ends. Not with victory, not with salvation, but with understanding. The Space Marines were never heroes. They were weapons shaped by divine arrogance, built to wage wars that could never end. Their loyalty, their strength, their immortality, all of it was a lie wrapped in gold. A masterpiece of tragedy that could only ever lead here, to the ashes of everything. The Emperor sits upon his throne, his body dead but his will enslaved to the machinery of his own making. The Imperium still worships him, blind to the irony that their faith chains him tighter than any heretic ever could. The galaxy still burns, and the Space Marines still fight, each battle another heartbeat in an empire that refuses to die. But somewhere, in that endless dark, maybe one Marine still questions it all. Maybe one remembers what it meant to be human, to feel, to doubt, to choose. Maybe one voice whispers into the void, not in prayer, but in confession. We were made to save mankind. But we only saved its suffering. And perhaps, that is the only truth that ever mattered. Because the Emperor's dream was never about peace. It was about control. The Astartes were never humanity's future, they were its cage. They made humanity dependent, stagnant, afraid to live without them. And so long as they exist, the galaxy will never heal. The Emperor once sought to destroy the gods, yet became one. He sought to perfect humanity, yet destroyed it. And in the end, he became the very thing he swore to overthrow, a symbol, worshipped but hollow. So the story closes, not with triumph or redemption, but with revelation. The Space Marines were the perfect soldiers, but perfection was the enemy all along. They were forged to conquer the stars, but in doing so, they extinguished their own light. The universe will move on, long after the last chapter falls. The memory of the Emperor, the legions, the heresy, all will fade into myth. And maybe, finally, mankind will rise again, not as gods, not as angels of death, but as men. Imperfect, fragile, and free. Because that was the lesson buried beneath 10,000 years of blood. That was the truth the Emperor never understood. Humanity never needed gods. It only needed to remember how to be human. And that is why the Space Marines should have never been made. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.